Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone. I am Fourtuna. I come from group 8 and today I want to present the material about English for science and technology. Okay, now let's go to the next slide. Introduction. The wide range of purposes and contexts in which English is used has made English for specific purposes, or ESP, an elective discipline. Typically trained as writing or language teachers, ESP teachers work outside of their own disciplines and must become ethnographers, exploring unfamiliar language varieties, disciplinary cultures and modes, and drawing on scholarship from a wide range of fields to do so. These include sociocultural studies, literacy studies, second language writing studies, rhetoric, and systemic functional linguistics. And then, perhaps because of the rapid expansion of English for science and technology, or EST, in the last 50 years, science and technology were an early focus for ESP researchers. The initial interest of EST teachers and researchers was on linguistic forms, with later emphasis on skills. A more recent focus has been on disciplinary socialization, and most recently, a critical perspective, which considers how literacy practice express societal or disciplinary power differences. Okay, next. The expanding focus of ESP. Halliday in 1993 comments that a text is recognized as scientific English because of the combined effect of clusters of features and, importantly, the relations of these features through a text. Yet characteristic forms and vocabulary of science or technology shouldn't be considered as separate from the genres in which they occur, because linguistic differences are part of what constitutes genre. Similarly, the genres of science and technology partially constitute the various disciplines and cannot be separated from them. This expanded perspective of ESP has replaced a notion of skills transferable between disciplines with the conception of specific literacies acquired in the context of the discipline. This creates a difficulty for EST teachers who must provide access for their students into the discourse community of which they are usually not members. To mitigate the status of EST teachers as disciplinary outsider, Smith-Taylor in 2007 suggests training discipline insiders in writing instruction to circumvent EST teachers' lack of insider knowledge. In addition to relying on employers, disciplinary teachers or students to ameliorate their outsider status, EST teachers also have a valuable studies of the discourse features of science and technology texts, as well as studies of disciplinary cultures. Okay, next. Culture and values. To become a member of a science discourse community, a student needs to participate in and come to regard as natural research science values that science is quantitative, repeatable, and ideally free from bias. Engineering values, by contrast, are concerned with the design process and problem solving within set specifications. Associated discourse includes argument that links scientific phenomena to specific contexts. However, from a critical discourse perspective, disciplinary discourse is not equally accessible to everyone, and the task of ESP teachers includes assisting students in unpacking their disciplines, ideological assumptions, rather than merely accepting and coming to share this. And then, a discipline's culture may vary too between countries. Artmeva in 1998 found that the different values in a North American and a Russian engineering company resulted in different views of rhetorical purposes. Audience organization, all expressed at the levels of sentence and paragraph organization, thematic structure, and even content of periodic progress reports. And then, insight into discourse communities' values has come to from examination of the research article RA, including measurements in 1988, study of its historical development. Discourse communities are driven by this published outcome of research because publication represents community acceptance of research claims in MERS in 1989. Linguistic and rhetorical features of RAs reflect this purpose. For example, in the impersonal language of science, RAs is a convention for expressing objectivity and the need to represent findings as separated from time and person. It reflects the desire to broaden applicability of a finding noted to the individual researcher, and also to make it appear that nature speaks for itself. Insight into the values of science and technology discourse communities is valuable to ESD teachers from another perspective too, in that it helps them to assist students to access these communities. Okay, next, integration into the ESD discourse community. A disciplinary socialization perspective views students as not merely learning the registers and genres important in their disciplines, but as being enculturated into those disciplines by learning disciplinary values and behavior. This perspective draws on sociocultural theory, viewing discourse practices as learned through interaction with those who have already mastered them. A language socialization perspective may, however, represent the process of acquiring new literacy practices too simply. Lee and Street in 1998 agreed that acquiring disciplinary literacy requires a student to take on a new disciplinary identity, one with which they may not be comfortable and which they may therefore resist. These perspectives have led ESD practitioners or researchers to use ethnographic methods in investigating the target discourse community. For example, conceptualized as U.S. Computer Engineering Department as a speech community containing communicative norms. She viewed individuals as being competent members of this discourse community when they had an understanding of the range of activities that members participate in. Focusing on a single speech event, the team meeting, she describes the socialization of NNS students into the discourse of students' design team. Attention has been paid to professional engineers team meetings. Angourie in 2010 compares recordings of engineers meetings with their representation in ESP textbooks. Her findings include different turn-taking mechanisms, much overlapping talk, back channeling interactions, extending or completing each other's utterances, a lower degree of efficiency in the real data. By contrast, in the textbooks, speakers have non-overlapping turns in which speakers nominate the next speaker rather than speakers judging the appropriate place to take a turn. And then, also working in the language socialization paradigm, Sims and Hilgers in 2000 studied instructors in undergraduate science and engineering contents courses. They characterized them as variously playing the role of corrector, where the goal was content mastery. Journal editor, students peer reviewed each other's works, and collaborative assignments involved research and had multiple readers. Students of the editor and collaborator instructors learned about genre in addition to content, while the collaborator segments gave students a sense of working within science or engineering, where collaboration and repeated review of writing are the norm. Okay, that's all for me. We go to the next slide with new speaker.
So, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Sidqi. I'm from Group 8. And without any further ado, let's just get started. So first, we have research into ESD genres. Research into ESD genres is to investigate teachers outside the status and gain insight into the genres and culture of these communities. Researchers have worked on identifying key ESD genres. Swells 2004 has noted that genres in any discipline or discourse community come in related states, such as the RA and the lab report, the feasibility study and progress report, and the engineering presentation and design report. Much progress has been made also in analyzing the rhetorical and linguistic features of genres and identifying how they reflect the values and culture of this discourse community. The task is complicated by the fact that the key genres of these discourse communities are not identical with the genres demanded of students. Having identified work-related genres and or pedagogical student genres, the ESD teacher must consider how best to teach them in order to provide access to discourse community. In the next section, I review work on a range of science and engineering genres, starting with the RI. So, RA, rhetorical features of the research article. Investigation of high-stakes genres such as RA have been valuable to ESD teachers of graduate of professionals who must read and write RAs. This investigation has also been valuable in revealing registered features and providing insight into the value system of particular science and technology disciplines and their discourse communities. In his study of development of the RA, Bezerman 1988 indicates how the genre developed to convince readers who had not observed experiments. Newton, for example, represents himself in his writing as an ideal experimental scientist who isolates phenomena in a planned and orderly way. Newton's persuasive use of language has been influential, and Halliday 1993 explores its continuing grammatical influence. Bezerman 1988 notes that literature survey length and number of reference to the literature depends on how focused the discipline is and the degree of consensus within it. As a discipline develops, it becomes increasingly embedded in theory and knowledge rather than methods or instruments. So let's move to the next slide. There we have thesis and dissertation. Thesis and dissertation represent and generally similar in form to the RA. Peltridge 2002 found a number of alternative macrostructures and that advice in published handbooks did not much practice, indicating the value of specific instruction for graduate students. Santoni 2006 compare rhetorical strategies and used by engineering RA and thesis writers. She suggests the tendency of the student writers to hedge more, avoid personal attribution, distance themselves from their claims, and acknowledge limitation reflects different reader-writer power relationship in the two genres. She suggests a need for prospective engineers to be sensitized to expected community rhetorical strategies. Let's move to the next slide. Let's move to the next one. Studies of science textbook. So, science textbook has been the subject of some study. Myers 1992, Schlepperger 2004, Answorth 1997, Young and Nguyen 2002. Textbooks are the main reading of science. Jackson, Mayer, and Parkinson 2006. Myers 1992 and Engineering Undergraduate Parody 2009. Although Leventhal and Minette 1987 found that senior software engineering students reach RA, Swalls 1995 notes the textbooks employ little hedging or human agency and use abstract nominalization as subject of processes. Myers' 1992 comparison of these two genres found a number of registered differences. Personal subjects such as we in RA refer to researchers. In textbook, they refer to reader and writer. RA as written in the past tense for method and in the present for well-accepted facts in the discipline. Almost all claims are hedged, while in textbook there are few hedged. Highland 2004, Parkinson and Adondorif 2005. RS achieve cohesion through known phrases repetition, while textbook do so using logical connectors and a range of meta-discoursal market. Highland 2004. The main types of image associated with RA are graph and equations, while textbook use photograph and naturalistic drawing and diagram. So next we have pedagogical genres. A controversial issue in writing pedagogy has been whether genres should be explicitly taught. In the area of rhetorical genre studies, some writing specialists, Friedman 1993, have avoided explicit instruction because of a dynamic nature of genres and incidental student learning of genre features through immersion in the disciplinary culture, while others have focused explicit teaching on context and situation rather than form. Giltro and Stein 2009. ESP writing instruction has however favored explicit instruction on form, viewing it as of particular value to non-native speakers who may find access to disciplinary culture less easy than the native speaker. Next we have laboratory reports. Bernes 1989 study of writing assignment to science and engineering courses found that most assignments were either lab or design reports. Other writing included summary, reaction, case study, and library research papers. The lab report socializes students into core disciplinary values in experimental science, including convention for expressing objectivity, a value for quantitative methods, the need to show continue of one's own finding with the literature, and a preference for mathematical model. The introduction, method, result discussion, organization of lab report is similar to the experimental RA. The two genres also have similarities in purpose in that they report experimental result. Although the RA must report new findings, while the lab report display laboratory skills and understanding of accepted knowledge. Parkinson, 2011. The lab report's writer writes for a person reading the report, while the RA writer addresses peers. And the last one of research into ESD genres, we have design reports. The design report is identified by Marshall 1991 as one of three important writing engineering genres. The other two has identified as important are the work experience report and the instruction manual. Design usually taught through problem-based learning, or we can say it PBL, is a key outcome for engineering education. PBL enculturates students into the activities of engineering by using group work as practicing engineers do. To solve design problems, students make and test the products of their design. They report on this process in the design reports as well as interim progress reports. Unlike a lab report, design reports consider the feasibility and cost of design as well as match to specification, not merely scientific technical element. Next, in the next slide we have language features of EST. First, we have vocabulary as well as grammar. As grammar differs from discipline to discipline. The grammatical and lexical feature of language we use for specific purposes by definition, specialist, and not a routine part of a native speaker, reported to the 1997. Indeed, corpus studies have shown how specialist the lexic, grammar, and discourse strategies of disciplinary genres are published in 2009. Thus, ESP has tended to emphasize communication in the specialist target context rather than language teaching. Engagement. So, engagement, personal language, and citation practices. Language in science and technology is generally viewed as a very impersonal. Students are encouraged by discipline specialists and ESP textbook and teachers to avoid personal language in order to appear objective. Corpus studies have, however, shown that RA do use personal pronouns and that writers express stance and engagement in a number of ways. Highland 2001 studied personal pronouns in published RAs on average in physics, biology, and electrical and mechanical engineering. There were 17.6 self-mention per RA, including 11.9 personal pronouns. He noted that use of personal pronouns is a way of projecting a scholarly identity. It is important for students to be sensitized to their own disciplinary norms, as norms vary between disciplines. see language. Model. So next we have INTS and multimodal, and graphs and diagram are an important part of science and technology discourse. Indication for further research direction. Although much is known about the RA, much work on the genre is still necessary, particularly on section other than the introduction. Let's just jump to conclusion. So the conclusion is this chapter has indicated the need for EST teacher to take account not only of lexis, grammar, and genres of science and engineering, but also to consider the disciplinary context into which students are being socialized, including the culture and values of these disciplines. So I think that's all that I can explain. At least, but not least, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.